All right, let's get started. Thank you all for being here. We have a really cool event today on plot and plotting. Our two workshop leaders are Brendan Phipps and Diani Sabin, and we've got some really cool stuff I know coming up here that I personally am extremely excited about. So the first part of all of this is going to be a introduction from our workshop leaders and a talk by them about the subject of plot. And then they'll follow that up with a lead into a writing segment where we all get to actually write and do what the workshop is about based on prompts that they provide. And we'll all come back here and we'll have a moment to share a very short line of our own work if we'd like to. No pressure, but if we'd like to, we can. And then also a Q&A segment for our workshop leaders and a little community discussion if anybody has anything else they want to say. All right, without any further ado, I will hand it off to our workshop leaders for today. Take it away, guys.
Cool. Thanks, Odin. So like he said, I am Brendan Phipps. I first got into writing as an actor, actually. I was acting for many years and growing tired of the lack of things available to me. Part of that was because I was in a town of 10,000 people. But just kind of tired of, not getting cast in the roles I wanted, not even having them available to me. And so I finally just kind of got fed up with it and said, you know what, screw this. I'm going to just write my own script. I'm going to cast myself as the lead, which those were terrible because you can't write yourself as the lead and have it be okay. It doesn't work. But kind of just started the ball rolling that way. I then got into doing more film stuff with actually Carson here. He and I did a lot of film stuff down in LA, writing and directing our own stuff. And finally just kind of started wanting to expand a little bit. My dad is a novelist. Does a lot of murder mystery books, and just kind of he and I one day we wanted to try each other's writing styles. So I tried to pick up some prose and he tried to pick up some screenwriting. And just kind of got hooked from there. I've been doing it ever since. This is coming on 10, 12 years or so now of having done this. So yeah, it's kind of fun doing it in a whole community now. I haven't had a whole community set up like this until Odin brought me into this little group here, which is kind of fun. But yeah, that's pretty much all about me.
Cool. Hi, I'm Diani. I'm the other half of this dynamic duo. I am first and foremost a science journalist. So most of my work thus far is in nonfiction, which is kind of a funny way to start coming at plots, given that I spent a lot of time at what actually happened? And it's sometimes an excellent story, and sometimes it's like the most boring thing you've ever heard. And as a journalist, you still have to make it sound interesting. And after working freelance for a few years, I moved out of New York, and basically that's you freelance as a journalist if you're not living in New York. And I decided that I was burned out and tired, and I had started writing a novel in my spare time. And now I am, very close to finishing my MFA. Good Lord. A few more months and I'll be done. And have now, I don't know, what is my writing journey? It's more like 5 years, but only like the last 2 have been very solidly focused on fiction. And it's been a good time. So, Brendan, tell me about your plot model.
So,
how do you do it?
My plot model, I focus a lot on fantasy and science fiction and, adventuring. And so my plot model really focuses on a string of events. The characters are just kind of there to experience that. And so where I first start is just coming up with 3 major events. and we'll go into this a little bit later, a little bit more exactly, but the kind of bare bones of it is I just take those, 3 core events and then create, take point A and point B, create 3 smaller events that segue into those 2, and then point B to point C and create 3 events that segue into those, in between those 2 points. And by just kind of filing down, getting to little smaller and smaller things, I find my script has almost written itself, or my book has even almost written itself through plotting, just filing down to the tiniest of points. There's one, and Diani and I have gotten into this. I've written I had a 20-page little short story that I wrote for a book that a couple of us wrote for. And that one 20-page story, I had a 5.5-page outline for it, because I broke it down all the way down to plot points of he slaps this person. Like I was getting so into little details with it. Diani's already shaking her head because she can't.
I'm gonna lose it.
She hates my plot style. I focus on those events, and then I create a character, both protagonist and antagonist, that feed into those, and so we can experience from his point of view. But my first focus is what's going on in the world. And I know Diani's already.
Yeah, I'm just gonna join, because
Do it.
This is so opposite from how I work. If I try and make an outline, I will sit and I'll look at this beautiful outline and I'll be unable to write a single word. So I come at this from a really different perspective of I sit down and I start with a character. Like, if I know who my main character is and what it is that they are trying to get, and then ultimately what is going to happen, like, do they get it or do they not get it? Like, do we save the world or do we fail? Like, I know my end point, and I know about what I want the Act 1, and I'm going to use sort of the Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 structure for most of my, at least initial thinking of stories. I'll know what, like, the Act 1, like, what's the point of no return? And I will just start writing. I'll just go. I'll enter the world, basically bare bones. Here's a character. I know what the point of no return is, and I know vaguely how I want it to end. And I'm just gonna explore and learn about the story with basically this only as my plotting structure. Which is, and then the secret of this is that, like, you get to after your point of no return, and then you're like, okay, well, now what happens? And you have to kind of figure out what the next point of no return is, and struggle your way through to there, and then you find what's the one in Act 3, and then all of a sudden you're done.
I can't even. Well, okay, so one thing we've done for you guys is we have actually taken Star Wars A New Hope, and we have broken it down using each one of our plot models. And so you can kind of see, we took this, knowing that most everyone has seen or at least knows A New Hope. So you can actually recognize the different things that we're going. Do you want to go first, Giuliani? You want me to do mine?
I can go first. Or I could let's let you go first. I have to open my file.
Okay, yeah, I've got mine right here. So if I'm looking at A New Hope, my main 3 events that I'm going to be kind of creating is going to be the destruction of Alderaan, the death of Obi-Wan, and then the destruction of the Death Star. And those are going to be my 3 major events that happen in this world that I'm working in. Now, we're just going to start breaking it down then. So between the destruction of Alderaan and the death of Obi-Wan, I need to make 3 different smaller events that tie those together. In that movie, it would be whoever my main characters ultimately will be arrive at the destruction of the planet. They discover the Death Star and get trapped by it, and then you discover Princess Leia while trying to figure out how to escape. Then from the death of Obi-Wan to the destruction of the Death Star, breaking that down, I would make it be the reuniting with the rebels and Han leaving. Then you've got everyone trying to make a run at the Death Star to try to destroy it, but everyone getting killed. And then Luke uses the Force for the first time in that scene, more than, practicing with his lightsaber, but really using the Force while trying to aim his turret there. Now, once I have these kind of major events and kind of a string of things that go along with it, now I got to create a character that helps view this series of events. Obviously, in this case, I'm going to go with Luke. Now my next step is going to be creating, how does my main character relate to each one of the three major events? Because you have to have them have some connection to your major events, whether directly or indirectly. So mine would be, with the destruction of Alderaan, is very indirect to Luke's story. It's more about establishing, Tarkin and Darth Vader as the villains by doing this such an atrocious war crime. Then 2 and 3 are really direct towards Luke, with 1, the death of his mentor, and then 2, he's the cause of the destruction of the Death Star at the end. Now, knowing that I have a protagonist going through all of this, I'm going to flip that now and look at who is my antagonist and what are they trying to get out of all of this. And I do the exact same process. I go back through, how do they relate to each one of the three? And looking at the first one, he was very much the cause. I know Tarkin was the one who actually commanded the firing shot, but Vader was very much the one kind of bringing the story together, bringing Leia into it, making her give up the location, bringing that whole scene together. Then in killing Obi-Wan, he is the one killing him, and it's very symbolic of killing both his and Luke's mentor. So in that, even without knowing Vader is Luke's father yet, we've already have these two guys being connected through the death of both of their mentors. And then the last one is him fighting to protect the Death Star, because if you recall, he doesn't just sit around and hang out and wait for something good to happen, but he actually gets into a TIE fighter and flies out. Lastly, my 2 last steps here is what brings the character into this string of events and what brings the characters out. For mine, the 3 events that bring them in would be the purchase of the droids, Luke's introduction to Obi-Wan, and the death of Owen and Beru. Would be my 3 kind of key points to hit on in Luke's story that would bring him into this string of events that I've created. And then with any good story, you can't just, unless you want to purposely do a cliffhanger, can't just say, oh, it's over now. So my kind of segue to the end would be purposely showing Darth Vader getting in his TIE fighter, getting thrown safely away from the destruction, implying that he is still alive. Then you've got everyone coming back and celebrating. Han came back and helped everyone. We're happy about that. And then you've closed out with the award ceremony, really bringing all of these characters finally together. And that would be kind of how I would, if I were mapping out A New Hope as a writer, would be my process. But Deani, what's yours?
Yeah, well, I think that's really interesting because, hilariously, for me, I have much of the destruction of Alderaan for me is like that point of no return. Like if I'm going into writing the story, I know that's like the one event that I know is actually going to happen. But for me, when I am sitting down to write A New Hope, because everything I'm doing is really focused on character, and I'm going to quibble with George Lucas a little bit because he and I clearly have different ideas of what this film is set up to be. But the main character is Leia. Leia is the first character who's making active choices that we're introduced to, right? And this is also a little bit of a difference between film and novels. In a film, you're able to start like in the middle of the action, get the audience's interest, and then move on. And in a novel, you're going to start with whoever your main character is, for the most part, unless you're writing a prologue, and that's kind of its own deal. But for me, as a writer, I'm starting with Leia. Leia is my point of focus character. She's interesting. She's the senator who's in the middle of trying to overthrow a fascist regime from the inside. She's got this secret information, and she has clearly messed up somehow. We're ignoring the fact that Rogue One exists. She's messed up somehow, and I love Rogue One. It doesn't make sense in this system. But she's being boarded, and the plans are going to be taken, and so she essentially begins what I call it's a try-fail sequence. And this is something that Tobias Vickel, who is one of the mentors at my MFA, likes to talk about a lot. Of when you have character-plotted stories, essentially you have multiple sequences of the character is presented with a problem, and they try to solve it, but they fail. And they're going to keep trying and keep failing until, they have learned something or they have suffered so much from their own hubris that the story ends. So Leia sends the droids off to Alderaan, and this begins her essentially try-fail sequence. She has done the thing that she can, and now she's going to prison, right? She is in the middle of the most secure Imperial facilities, and there is literally nothing else she can do. As a writer, this is a questionable decision because your main character is now stuck in a giant prison, and so you have to switch focus, and we follow the droids. Like, we're literally following the message as it is trying to get to Obi-Wan, who can help Leia. This is her decision: find Obi-Wan. And so in this, for me, the sequence of like the droids trundling along, Luke, chasing after them through the desert. Obi-Wan knocks out Luke. Obi-Wan is like, shows Luke the message. All of this is leading up to Obi-Wan being like, Luke, you need to come and help me. You've got to get involved outside your world. Like, this is the next step. I need your help. Luke refusing. You kill Owen and Beru. And then, interestingly, George Lucas flashes to the villain cam, where we see Leia returning to the main fold as these heroes are essentially failing to come rescue her, and she's being tortured for information. You kind of learn that Leia as a character is like, she's very much in control of her environment, of herself. Like, her story is one of practicing as much control as possible. And then we flash back. We meet Han, who is important in A New Hope specifically because he is the foil to Leia. He is your rogue. He's shooting first and asking questions later. He's very motivated by money instead of Leia's kind of noble principles. And now we begin the sequence of trying to get them to Alderaan. We flash back to Leia, and now that we know there's help on the way, things are looking up. But sorry, Leia has still made a lot of really bad choices, and this is the end of Alderaan. And now, as a writer, I'm sitting there like, well, great, what the fuck do I do now? And so you begin the second try-fail sequence. This is everyone else discovering the ruins of Alderaan, being like, oh god, now we're trapped on this space station. I guess we're gonna have to like sneak around, and we get the trash compactor scene, and we get Han trying to talk to the Imperial guards on the radio and losing his cool. And all through all of this, you see Leia and Han essentially as opposites here. This is an interesting try-fail sequence because it's showing you something new about your main character, right? She is learning to go with the flow. She's really messed up. She has to solve this problem somehow. So she has to work with what she's been given, which is a disaster. And because of this series of disasters, Obi-Wan, the person that she trusted to save her, dies. and she has to run off with this little scraggly group of rebels and solve her problem somehow. And for me as a writer, this is about what I think Act 3 is. You've raised the stakes up considerably. You've got a ton more problems in the works. And essentially you've got your main character with her back to the wall, and you kind of have to see, like, what are they made of? And in this case, in A New Hope, Leia's decision is to stay with the rebel base, even though she knows that the Empire is coming with a weapon that will destroy the planet that they're sitting on. There's no way out for her. It's an interesting choice if you look at her opening the series off-planet, safe from the destruction of her homeland, able to only witness what happens, to then choosing to, instead of being off in a ship flying around, she is physically on site with her people. And as Luke is, like, you know, turning off his navigating computer and Han is going off to who knows where, she is just going with the flow. This is what she's been given, and these are the, you know, this is the hand she's been dealt, and she's dealing with it. And then because this is a happy story, of course, you know, Luke learns to use the Force, Han comes back, everyone is happy except that Darth Vader has miraculously escaped, and you know that the story continues. And to be fair, you can map this story with Luke. It is technically Luke's story, but I think it's a little boring. So.
Well, you know, looking at kind of our two plot styles, something actually just occurred to me. As much as you and I have discussed this in the past, one thing that kind of occurred to me right now. I like having a lot of control over my stories. I like knowing where it's going to go, who's going to be where, you know, especially something in, you know, in a mystery. I like knowing who did what and where and how, but it doesn't allow a lot of kind of improvisational character growth. One benefit to your style is, you know, getting to that scene and just kind of like, all right, Leia's in a prison. Somehow we're going to get her out. You know what? Sure, they'll grab some stormtrooper outfits. We'll totally go with that. And just kind of work with it and flow with it. I would have sat for, you know, an hour sitting there planning it out, plotting it in my head, going, how can we get these guys over there? How can we get this out? And that's just a little bit of my kind of OCD of needing to control the story and control where everything goes in that.
Well, and it's interesting because if I did sit down to, like, try and plot it out, I would block myself, right? It's actually part of the experience of discovering what happens next is what's driving my writing in many ways. I like to find the world literally on the page instead of having some kind of external series of outline points that I'm trying to meet. I know I've mentioned this to you, but the novel that I wrote for my MFA, it's a mystery novel, essentially. And I just sort of wrote the first act very loosey-goosey, not knowing anything about the mystery. I didn't know, like, who was where was my missing person? Like, who was the murderer?
I know. You wanted me to flip my computer when you're telling me this. Like, how do you not know who the murderer is in a murder mystery? I don't understand. I can't comprehend.
Right. Well, so then I got to the end of Act 1 and I was like, well, shit. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I actually did have to sit down and outline it, like, figure out, okay, who's the murderer? Like, what's going on? And as I sat there looking at my outline, I couldn't write another word for like a month until I had literally forgotten the details of the outline I had written down, except for, like, I have about like a 3-word little description, like, you know, Fee finds murder weapon is like one of the things. And once I could sit down and be like, wait, what is the murder weapon? I was like, oh, thank God, I'm golden again. I can write. Because it's that exploration. And like I certainly did need to take that time to sit and, like, actually, you know, figure out some of the mystery. But even, like, I didn't know some of the things that I knew in the third act until I got to them. And I was like, oh, that's why he did that. Wow.
Who, just kind of as to a general question, I realize you guys are all muted as I'm asking a question. This is a little counterintuitive. But who out there has done a Nanowrimo project? Or even knows what Nanowrimo is? Am I losing people? So Nanowrimo, for those, and we've got a couple of icons here, so I can't see your reactions, but Nanowrimo is the National Novel Writing Month. And someone mystical decided that November is the month that we write novels. And so they run a challenge, and it's not any kind of you win money or any kind of, a race against other people. It's more of a competition against yourself. But the goal is to write a 50,000 word novel in a single month, which is a tall order. It's not one that I've done it once. I've succeeded in that case once. I did have one writing teacher who made a good point, though, that she dislikes the nano process of saying that you succeed if you make that 50,000 word goal and otherwise you fail. When realistically, if you write a 35,000 word novel, you still wrote a novel in a month. Any way you look at that, you still wrote a novel in a month. But one of the things that Nanowrimo really brings out, and they talk about this, and there's big, huge, long forums about it, is the difference between a plotter and a pantser. And the plotter is the guy who sits there in the month of October and, like me, sits there and writes a detailed outline. And then the pantser is Gianni here, who says, I have got an idea, let's just make shit up. And it's one that, in the discussions that we've had between the two of us, it's really hard to flip. Once you're set into a style, it's really hard to flip, because we've talked about doing each other's styles, and both of us just get into this mental block that we can't escape from. Because I sit there, I try and pants it, and I don't know where my characters are going, and I flounder on the page, and I don't know what to do or where to go. And then Gianni goes and gets blocked by an outline. So it's one that there is no one final rule for plotting. There is nothing that I can say to anyone as a writer, even if they're brand new, if they're experienced, it doesn't matter. If there's not something that I can say, here's what you do, here's how you fix it. Because little things are going to work very differently for everybody. And even if, you can use my style of following the string of events, but still kind of go with the Panzer style and making it up as you go, but being a very event-driven story. And that's fine too. Or you can look at both of our styles and be like, both of you guys don't have any idea what you're talking about. I'm going to take that from his and that from hers and make your own style, and that's fine. It really comes down to what really works for you guys.
Yeah. Writer, know thyself. And hilariously, one of the things that we talked about is actually, I made a graph. I don't know if you can see my graph.
I don't.
But
you do have the graph.
I have it here. So along one axis, we've got plotter and pantser. You can see Brendan is over here, and I am all the way at the other corner. The other axis is what's driving your story, character or event. So you can see that Brendan and I are actually diagonally, probably the most opposed in this sort of idea of are you using characters to drive your story, or are you using events to drive your story? And are you more of a plotting out kind of person, or are you more of a, I have 3 events in mind, I kind of know the world, and I'm just going to go? And I think really the key is trying some stuff out yourself. Which I think, unless you have other thoughts, Brendan, this may be a moment.
No, I was trying to upload your chart here into the thing, and it's showing some very strange icon. I don't know what's going on.
I will upload the chart. I think, if I can find it. But I shared it too. Put it. Julia, are you here? Can you hear me? There's a message. Oh, okay. Hi, Julia. Sorry, I cut out. I thought I was here. I am live. I am not a cat.
Right.
Okay,
You are not a cat filter.
Not a cat filter. Okay. So, I've uploaded the little graph for you all to look at your convenience. Now, we have made 2 different styles of plot prompts. With the idea that maybe one of our methods sounds more like you, that you want to give it a try now, and you'll have the other one to try later. So there are 9 points on each of these plot prompts. You get about 4 minutes per prompt, and by the end of it, you should have a whole story. You're not necessarily working in chronological order. Brendan, we will have to talk about beginnings, maybe afterwards. But
yeah, okay. So hold on. my issue with beginnings, and the main reason why she's making fun of me for it. Everyone wants the beginning of their story to be amazing and perfect, and there's a lot of pressure on novels in particular that that first little bits really got to hook your writer and really got to pull them in, because unlike a film, we don't get to just jump straight into the action. We have to actually get the writers hooked into wanting to read the story and wanting to put in the a few weeks to a month commitment that it takes to read the novel. Well, I usually leave my beginning, my introduction, even the entire first chapter, for much later in my project, because I will get hung up on wanting to create such the perfect introduction scene that I won't write anything else. I'll get so stuck on trying to do that one scene so perfectly that I can't even, it blocks me for the rest of the project. And so what I'll do is I'll skip to, chapter 2, and I'll start writing from there and be able to then really get my story going, because it isn't, at that point, I don't need that, I gotta hook the guy in. Presumably at that point, they're already committed to reading my novel. And so I'm already building this world, I'm already writing characters in. I'll then go back and write my first chapter and really be able to now spend time knowing who my characters are, knowing the world, knowing where this is all going to go, be able to write a introduction scene or an introduction chapter that I feel really pulls people into the rest of my story. I know Gianni likes kind of...
Yeah, I just want to go. And this doesn't, I'm just going to get into the world. And usually it's because I have such a strong sense of the character that I know, what is the moment that the character's life changes, right? This is where the story begins, this is the thing that's going to change everything. And this is we're starting around that event. So that's where the story starts. And because I know who the character is and I know what's going to change them, it's pretty easy to say, I know exactly where to start. This does not mean that I don't go back at the end and rewrite that opening scene a million times, because I do. But I think because the pantsing plot style is a lot more of going back and forth. I'll write 2 or 3 chapters ahead, and then I'll realize that I'm stuck, and I'll scroll back and I'll find something in chapter 4 and be like, oh, that's great. And then I'll start weaving it through. And then I'll get to the point where I was stuck and oh, but now I know that I'm losing this thing from chapter 4, and that's how I keep going. And because of this kind of is the computer thing, you're doing iterations essentially of starting and stopping and starting and stopping and moving slightly farther each time. that I kind of accept that there's a lot of revision that's happening in live time, and so the opening doesn't tend to cause as much block, a similar amount of existential angst, but I'm not frozen quite so much.
Well, so let's kind of jump over into our plots here. So in the roundtable chat, I posted, we broke them down into 9 plot points with the knowledge and in theory that once you complete all 9, you will have a plot. You will have a plot to a new story and be able to then kind of go from there. The other way you can kind of tackle these plots, because I know there was some comment about this in one of the chats. Someone was complaining that they had gotten partway through their story and had no idea how to continue. My best advice for that would be to take a step back and kind of look at the bones of your story. And whether you use my plot style or Diani's or a whole nother plot style, but kind of take back away from your project and look at what you have so far and how does that plug into your kind of plot style and where does it want to go. And in Diani's pantsing style, she made a good point actually the other day, of because I get thoroughly lost when I think about trying to pants it, but hers was at the end of Act 1 and Act 2 having a moment where you just stop and reevaluate what you have had so far and continuing on from there. And that's another good way of doing it. And stopping, reread what you've already written. What do you have? What do you need to go? Where do you need to take these characters? And build off from there. I don't know if we have the person who was complaining about that in this group or not, but we shall see.
We shall see. Okay, so choose a method or decide you're going to do your own blended method. And we're going to set run a clock make a chime every 4 minutes. How do we?
Yeah, I would say do that. I would say kind of do your best to focus on one bullet point at a time, whether or not you follow it to, the first, the second, the third, but kind of in each one of these little 4 or 5 minute segments that we've kind of paired up, focus on one of those bullet points at a time. And then as we move forward, we'll move on to other ones. So let's...
There is not a little clock in here, is there?
There is not a little clock, but what we'll do is I'll give everybody... everybody can keep track of their own segmented time. It's just trying to keep yourself following along the 4 minute chunks that they want.
Oh, that works.
And then we'll be going until about 15 to 20 after the next hour for our workshop. So it gives you kind of a length of time to check up on. I will give you a probably like a 5 minute warning when we're getting towards the very, very end there.
Cool. Well, we will see you guys in a little bit then.
Good luck.
Happy writing, everyone.
Happy writing.
Well, that was a lot of fun.
How's everybody feel with their cool new plots? That's all right. That's all right. You still have a plot in 40 something minutes.
Does anybody want to share?
I will go. So I was brave and daring. Tried Diani's plot structure, which, God, I just fought the keyboard the entire way through. However, I've got a story of a guy, an old man who's dying in his bed, and estate auctioneers are going through all of his stuff in the house to try to figure out, what could be sold to settle his debts and things like that. And couple of characters show up to help, like, hey, you know what? Let's get out of here. And they go off on their adventure trying to heal his relationship with his son. And he finally accepts, he's like, well, I'm accepting my fate. I'm going to go back and die. And in that final repose, revealing that he was effectively comatose the whole time, and those people who had helped him escaped, he was a writer, and those were his characters that he had written throughout the years, as now the people who are going through his things are like, oh, what is this book? I forget that, and kind of tossing it aside and naming off the characters that we had just kind of all been with.
You're not allowed to make me cry after that introduction.
All I can hope is that I slowly go crazy in the mind, surrounded by my own creations.
Surrounded by your own characters, right? I mean, that's not a bad way to go.
Oh, it's you, Spider-Man, but you have 8 arms instead of just the 4. No, wait. I can't imagine that there are many substances. I die surrounded by, hey, it's Harry Potter, but he's slightly cooler, and I wrote him when I was in high school. I'll go because I've started. I did Brendan, and mine was 3 major events. I said a fail. I wanted to do something kind of like a failure story. That was kind of what I decided to do. Was each point they failed. Kind of taking a bit of Gianni's also, and so it was there. I did a space theme because it's just where my mind went, and so I did a sabotage aboard a messenger ship containing critical information, which leads to a large, noble family losing a battle badly and having to retreat, and then in a horrible coup in this retreat, someone else grabs power from this noble family who is not inherently noble. Or rather, is going to clearly use it for their own means. The 3 things that I did the 3 breakdown things. I did the large-scale rally from available forces within a broadcast fails, and then a group of crappier ships assembles to fight a giant armada, and they think they're going to lose, so they do a desperate plan, which the main character takes part in, which also fails, but leads into another big fight scene, which could be cool, but that's gonna fail too.
I like the theme of they fail and then they just keep failing.
And then they go on to that military flagship, and a coup is undertaken, and the last person who's being guarded by the main character dies, and they've jettison themselves off into space because they failed. And there's something maybe a little, and I was, coming up with little motivations and stuff. And I was like, oh, it'd be funny if there's at the end of it they sort of just jettison off into space looking for some abstract death for some sort of justice. And that was where I kind of left it off.
That's a plot. Did anybody write a happy story?
What are those?
We
Lucas.
don't believe in happy stories.
Happy?
It's not entirely happy, but I guess vaguely. That being said, I tried Danny's method as well, and I had the issue where it gave me, I think, a good back and forth as the story progressed, but it feels like I've started a big story instead of written a little story or planned a little. That's a personal problem, I admit, but it might have be an effect of pantsing as well. Where basically it's like this big siege on a city, this sort of mid early Renaissance period with a bit of magic. And this guy, am I too quiet? Am I cutting out? Yeah. That's pretty common for me too. Okay. There's like a Janissary, like child soldier guy who's like, I'm sick of fighting. These commanders just going to throw my life away. I want out of here. And he plans this elaborate escape, but then there's like this important political prisoner that shows up, complicates things because he's assigned to guard them, and he can no longer get away as easily. So he ends up siding with this political prisoner in order to escape, and they manage to get away. But as it turns out, it's more complicated than I can bullet. But basically, they end up with this sort of magic bullshit happening, where they have escaped on accident with a cargo of prisoners that are like magically powered and are going to be sacrificed to make a bunch of magical weapons to end the siege. So he's like, well, I could stay here and just die, and then get away, or I can sort of, decide to fight with these people, with these sort of underdog rebels, and fight my own army, and maybe end the war in a more finite capacity. And so at the end of the story, he's like, I for these people in order to end the violence instead of just running away. And that's where it left off, which feels to me like a big part of the story.
It does. That feels like it segues into something big and grand there.
Yeah,
I like
it. It's more complicated. Is a very it's a feature of the pantsing method, I think. Suddenly, you have a whole truck full of magic prisoners, and you got to figure out what you're doing with them.
Hey, wait a minute. Yeah.
Jill.
Yeah, do it.
Okay,
hey, there we go.
I think I unmuted myself. I'm new to the Discord video. So, like Diani, I'm a dedicated character-driven pantser. So I decided to try Brendan's method, and it was very painful, and I hated it every second. But I decided to use it on a story that I'm kind of already working on to see if it would reframe anything that I was already trying to do, and it did.
Hey, there you go.
Which was really nice. I was actually able to get several little events that did not have to do with my main antagonist and protagonist. So I was really excited to have these little touch points of things that happen to other people, because I've spent so much time hanging out with my protagonist and antagonist. So I will admit that there are some benefits, but I'm going to go right back to pantsing.
That's totally fine.
Yeah. But this is it's a screenplay that Diani knows all about. But it's a historical fiction. What if Kate Bender of the serial killer Bender family and Mary Ingalls of the Laura Ingalls Wilder family were BFFs because they were in Kansas at the same time.
Oh my God. Well, Brendan, I'm going to have to personally thank you, because I've been trying to get Rachel to get me a draft of this story for 6 months. So if this speeds things up.
Get away from me with the cannon stick.
Little House and the serial killer. I like it. Anybody else? What about you, Odin or Carson? There you go. I see a hand there.
I can do mine. I did Diani's version as well. So mine centered around Gracie, who was a 6-year-old girl who feels like her family isn't complete and she wants a little sister. So she goes to her mom to try to convince her to give her a little sister, and the dad shows up, who is the antagonist in this story. And she views the mom is responsible for all the girls in the family, and the dad is responsible for all the boys because she's a 6-year-old girl. So when dad's not around, she tries to impress her mom by showing her how great it would be to have another little girl around. And her mom kind of tells her, that's not really how it works. It's a little more like you don't really know what's in the present you're getting, that type of thing. And that's something new to Gracie, the little girl. So she does, of course, what you do when it comes to present. She goes and visits, Mall Santa to tell him what she wants for Christmas, which doesn't work either. The mall Santa isn't really thrilled about promising the little sister, and they get in a fight. But the conclusion she comes to is she has to do this herself. It's not something she can convince other people to do. She has to build herself a little sister. So she finds like empty bottles and all sorts of that and kind of constructs a little sister doll. And this is where I kind of diverge from Diani's version, where it doesn't really succeed directly, but it kind of fails that this thing doesn't move, it doesn't come to life, but then the dad sees it and comes over to play with her and kind of brings it to life. And kind of through that, the sort of inner problem she solves at the end is like seeing the dad as kind of the completion of the family that she wasn't really close to at the beginning. And so that's kind of how that all resolves.
I like it.
And it's one of my mentors, Tobias, who I steal the try-fail thing. He talks a lot about there's a difference between what a character wants and what a character needs. And I think that's a really great illustration of like, yeah, I mean, she doesn't succeed at bringing the little sister to life, but she gets what she needs there at the end.
Yeah, she succeeds at kind of completing the family unit.
Yeah.
Really like that.
I like it.
Yeah. I also tried your method, Brendan, because I said I was going to. And it was terrible. I looked at the events section for about 10 minutes without writing anything. Oh, Catherine, I see that you had unmuted yourself. Okay. I had to get to step 4 and create a character and then go and create my events before I could get my story. But I did actually write a story about a girl who works at a garden center that's hit by an asteroid, and she spreads a parasitic alien bug to the rest of the world by accidentally allowing them to escape on the garden center mailing trucks because she just does not get paid enough to worry about the weird bugs in the garden center.
Nice.
I love the minimum wage problem. The attitude of I don't get paid enough for this shit. I don't care. Just let it happen. That's awesome.
What are your problems? One of them is capitalism. I don't know exactly how to work that into a plot outline.
Right. Is the primary antagonist is I don't make enough money. Yeah, jump in there, Captain.
You guys okay?
You're a little quiet. Maybe if you come a little closer to your mic, it might work.
Okay. I am using headphones, so that should...
Oh, hey, you're coming in a lot better now.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So first of all, I'll say I'm really nervous to share this because I think my perfectionism comes out and I don't like sharing outlines with people until I don't like sharing it till the story's done.
Yeah, I feel that.
So I'm going to step out of my comfort zone and do this. I tried Diani's method. What I came up with was I have a character who basically wants to change the world, wants to make it a better place. And she gets this job at this organization that she thinks is her dream job. And she realizes pretty quickly that there's a lot of problems within the organization, and they're changing the world in this one particular area, but they're very narrow-minded, and there's all these other aspects of the world that they're kind of making worse by their operating procedures. And then she thinks, okay, maybe they're just ignorant. Maybe I'm going to try to suggest new ways of operating. And then it gets worse because she realizes that they're basically just a pawn because it's a nonprofit, and they have these big donors, and the donors are basically controlling their every move. And the donors don't really have very good motivations. They're kind of using this nonprofit to make themselves look good. And so she's like, okay, I can't change this. I don't want to be part of this anymore. And so she's all set to quit. And then she has a medical emergency happen. She falls and breaks some bones or something. And health insurance doesn't cover it. They find a way to not have to do it. And so she feels trapped, and she feels like she has to keep working at this job. But then she finds this loophole that she realizes if she quits in the same month that the accident happened, she can jump on Medicaid because Medicaid's retroactive for a month, and she can move back home and live with her aunt and just like work very part-time helping in her aunt's sewing store and like fabric store and scrape by long enough to get Medicaid to cover these bills. And so it's sort of a failure because she had wanted to like go out in the world and do big things and great things, and now she's like back with her family. And this is where I feel like the pantsing method is really interesting, because I just randomly picked sewing store, I think because I had to go to a sewing store the other day to get thread. And I hadn't been in one in years, but it just popped into my mind. And then I just randomly thought about how, like, I automatically assumed it was her aunt's store because there's a stereotype that only women are going to be into sewing. And I was like, I don't really like that. And so then I thought, okay, what if she has this little cousin? He's a little boy and he loves sewing and he's, terrified to let anyone know and feels stigmatized and everything. And she sort of helps reduce the stigma for him and is supportive to him and stuff. And then I had gone on, I think, so then I ended up having her like decide to become a consultant. Like, so she realizes that she's been trying to change these large systems, and she's like, okay, I'm going to just start out on my own and be a consultant instead. And that succeeds, and that's the end of the story. But I actually liked the part about the little cousin the best. And so I sort of feel like cutting it down, because one of the problems I ran into is feeling like this is like too big a story and I want to write like a short story out of it. And so I was like, maybe if I had it end with her helping this one individual, and so like making the world better in a very small way, and so I would end it there. And I'm not sure exactly where I would start it, but I think I might start it a little later than I had initially planned. So that's what I came up with.
I like it. I like it a lot.
That.
Yeah.
I also love the capitalism as a plot problem coming up again. I was like, yes.
Thinking that when you were talking about that.
And I think it's so cool. I agree that one of the things about pantsing that is like a blessing and a curse is you do end up falling on like your first idea sometimes, which isn't always the best. Like you do have to be aware of like the stereotypes that you kind of inadvertently come across because you're not spending a lot of time outlining and thinking things ahead. And so there's definitely a revision process, both like while you're actually writing and then when you go back the next time to say like, okay, so this was my first idea that got me to the end. Is it actually the best idea? Is it what I want to say? Does it serve the story? I think you've got a lot of really great material to kind of uncover there.
One I kind of find with that too is you've got that first idea that really spurs along the story, and then as you get to the end and you kind of circle back to that first cause, a lot of times that has evolved. And it's not just about capitalism or about whatever that initial issue was that you had in your head of, I want to write this type of story. I want to write a story about aliens coming to a garden center. And by the time you get to the end and you kind of circle back, you're like, okay, hold on. This was actually the aliens were just kind of the plot that helped move it forward, but it wasn't really about them. It was about, this other aspect of it. And so it can help you get moving, but I always kind of see it, you circle back to it and you're like, actually, it's not what I started out with, but that's okay. About our glorious leader here? Were you just sitting there twiddling your thumbs? Or are you being productive?
Having an absolute blast, getting all these stories here. I love hearing what everybody's saying. I did do one. I'm actually gonna share it. I'm just gonna throw it up in the chat. There's an image for anyone who wants to take a look. And I did Brendan's method because I actually usually do Deanne's method, where I like following the story as it goes, just kind of through. But taking it from this perspective where I'm actually top-down structuring it, it was really interesting exercise and very different than what I'd normally done. what was fun is I had time to write that, and then I actually had time to write as if I, just sitting down to write the story. And I was realizing, well, I'm actually still using the method that Diani is describing here, where I'm going through and just pantsing the story as I'm writing it. But I know exactly where I'm headed. I know for sure that they have to see this one storage locker in this scene in order for it to appear in the 5th plot point I have on the on the little spreadsheet thing you do. I can speak words. I am a writer. So, that was really fun for me, getting to actually see both in practice and how they can blend together. So, yeah.
They do a lot of times blend very nicely. I'm kind of like you, Odin. There will be times when I'll be writing a scene and I know because of these, my plot points, I'll know where I'm trying to get to. And so sometimes I'll make some stuff up and have to then adjust my outline along the way. I can't do the 100% Panzer method. I've tried in the past, and I end up throwing in like 8 different Chekhov's guns into the story that I then never touch back on ever. I'm like, here's this really cool magic item for you, fantasy character. We're just gonna ignore that now. We don't care about that anymore. And I'll reread through it and go, what was I doing?
Well, it's funny because one of the things when I realized that I was a pantser when I watched this lecture that V.E. Schwab gave on something called the story corpse, which is one of my very favorite metaphors that she talks about of like building a story, literally like you're building a body from the ground up. And so she'll go through and list like the 300 scenes or something that she has in her head for a story. And those are like the bones. And she'll literally like splice them all together and she'll come up with 30 or 40 like literal prompts and just put them at the beginning of every chapter. And she'll just like she'll literally flesh out the prompt that she's written for herself from her scene. And like flesh out the body, and then her revision process is going back, and she calls it like putting on skin, like connecting everything, and then she'd use a final like making it pretty, like putting on the makeup and doing the hair of like her corpse, literally, to make the language pretty at the end. Disturbing. And it's one of the most like beautiful, incredible metaphors I've ever heard. And as I sat there listening to her talk about it, I was like, I could never do it like that. I think I would just feel so confined. But she talks about like if she doesn't know where she's going, literally like scene by scene, she just gets lost in her own world. And she talks a lot about her own anxieties as a writer in that way. But I think that there's a lot of blending between different methods because, after I have my first act, like sit down, check in, what the fuck am I doing moment, I do have like the vaguestness of an outline that, when I get to a chapter that I don't know what's next, I can look at like the little 1-sentence thing I've left for myself, which is like deliberately very sparse because I know that I need to like give myself as little information as possible to keep moving.
So coming originally from... Oh, Lucas, do you have a question there?
I wasn't sure if we do like doing the Q&A again or...
Yeah, let's
totally.
do it.
Yeah, do it. Go ahead.
Well, you're talking about the like blending of it to... Am I cutting out?
Yeah, you're cutting out a little bit.
One day, this computer will pick up my... Okay, so the question I was wondering is like, when you say blending it together, is it like, when I think of it as like different stages of the... I think pantsing versus planning tends to come out in my approach more or less during each stage. Like the very beginning of an idea, I have to have some idea, and that has to generate pantsingly, if you will. And then I'm like, okay, now that I have this, I can plan it out. But I can't plan out everything. I get bored and restricted, and everything starts to fall apart. So then there's like within each scene there, and I go back to the plan, and I do it again. And that if it's just that balance between people, like which one they like the more, or which stage they plan versus which stage. I don't know about that.
Yeah, a little bit, and that's actually, you've got a pretty good example of meshing those two sides. If you were to go 100% plotter, like I do at times, I go and I will just write down such detailed plot points that when I'm writing, I'm not straying anywhere. I'm just going A to B to C to D. But and I know that doesn't work for everyone. It doesn't work for me all the time either. And that's the other kind of part of it, is there are definitely stories that I write that I need to let them breathe. I need to let them do their thing. And so I'll have more, chapter by chapter level of plotting. So I know kind of generally where I'm going, but then just let the characters freeform. The kind of far other end of that, the full pantsing, is like you say, of you have that one sentence, that one line example that then you just go. That's one thing my dad will do. My dad is a hardcore pantser, and he just starts writing, and I'll read his stuff. I'm like, wait, where did this random character come from? He's like, well, I needed someone to shoot the main guy, so I created him. I'm like, but how? What? I don't understand how you just throw these characters randomly in here. He's like, yeah, I needed someone to do that. And that's how he rolls. He gets this one, my dad writes like a thesis statement. And that is what his book is about. And it's this, 3-sentence little paragraph. This is what the story is about. And then he just goes. And he can always revert back to that little paragraph to kind of check in. Am I still being true to this thesis? Cool. And then he just keeps going.
I actually do that. I have like I call it writing a love letter to the work in progress. Where I sit down and I actually write like all of my hopes and dreams for the story, especially for a novel, which is something I'm going to work on for like a year, right? Like if I sit down and I'm like, these are all of the things that I hope by the end of the story, this story looks like. And when I get stuck or when I feel like really awful about it, I'll just like go back and look at like, these are all of the things that I dream that this project can be. And that kind of like settles me back in like, this is what I was trying to say. And even if by the end of the story, it wasn't exactly what I was trying to say, like having that like kind of driving concept, like the meta thing beneath the story, helps focus where I'm going. I also weirdly write a lot of stories. I'll have a dream about a world. And like I'll have a very vivid image, literally I wake up from a dream, and like that is something that like inevitably is going to happen, and like I know that that's one of like the places where a lot of the world building gets pulled from. Like this Gladiator novel for my MFA project, the thing that I did for the MFA. The image that I had is literally this woman, like there's a storm coming. She lives in the desert. And she's covered in scars, and she gets into this empty ceramic bathtub and just lies there and waits for the poison rain to come. And she's like just there waiting to die, and then she doesn't. And like I woke up and I was like, holy shit, like what is this? And that's the moment I wrote the entire story towards. What that meant, like at some point, like this was a character who was super depressed, and this is a suicide attempt. In other, like the current rendition of the novel, this is like someone has tried to kill her, and she's trying to make her death as like much of a public statement as possible, kind of things. Like how it's framed has changed a lot, but the actual sequence of events and like the world that had to happen to create that image, just like drove the whole story.
That's really cool. I love hearing from people the experience of actually drawing that viscerally from something like a dream, and then finding a way to build that in. I love hearing too that you're building towards that moment, and the story could change, but that image itself needed to be there. And so changing the story around an image is almost a whole another form of plot construction in its own way.
Yeah. Well, I tried to take it out at one point. I was like, the only way I could frame this as a suicide attempt, it doesn't make sense. I'm taking it out. And then I floundered for like a month. Huh. And I was just like, okay, I guess if I put it back in there, and I could start writing again. Writing is weird, guys.
Does anybody... oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Rachel.
I have a question for you guys. I'm curious as to whether you think your different approaches towards plot impact how you approach rewrites and edits. Because I know for myself, I feel like my biggest struggle with rewriting is because I'm so character driven. If I go to try and fix a scene, the scene is completely different by the end, and then I have to rewrite everything else because I've completely changed the trajectory of what I'm trying to do. I don't know if there's you feel like, approaching it as a plotter avoids that, or if you feel less able to rewrite, or Diani, how do you not do what that is?
As someone who hates editing and rewriting, I hate that stage of it. But one thing that I will do, I will actually kind of adopt a much more pantsing method when it comes to doing my edits and my rewrites. Because one danger of plotting it all out, if you're not careful, is it can feel very dead and stiff. But, that gets me to my full story. I now have a full story, full world, beginning, middle, end, hero's journey nonsense. Then I can go back through and almost in a Panzer character-driven way, kind of look at each scene and just go, what if I just let my characters go? Would they get to the same conclusion? And if they do, then great, and we can, let them wiggle around here or there. And if they don't, then sometimes I do have to change around my whole story. There have been times that I've completely flipped everything around. There have been times when I have just kind of changed a character's arc, so the story will stay the same, but the reason why they get to the end game is for a completely different reason. But yeah, I usually take a very character-driven way of looking at the rewrite, just to kind of see if my characters would still do the things if I let them go free as if I had planned it out.
Or interestingly, I have to plot my rewrites. This is the one point where I really do get heavily plotted. Once the thing is there and it's living and breathing, the characters are on the page, I know, this is the literal, you have to go, right? So that, because Rachel, I have done the thing where I sit down and I'm like, this is, weird and bad, and the characters aren't, and I'm just going to start from the beginning with and make a different choice. And then I literally wrote the book again, but different, and it was still not working. And so I went back and I did not learn anything from the first thing, and I did it a third time, again, still bad, but it was different. And so what I learned from that was that I have to approach revision literally with a bullet point plan. I have to go through and I have to map okay, so this is my main character, this is these are the choices that they make, these are the consequences, these are how it all comes out, these are the things, this is your antagonist, this is what they're doing, this is the underlying logic, do they line up, these are the important plot points. I spent a lot of time looking at the Save the Cat beat sheets, a lot of these very structured methods of plots of what do you do if you have a 3-act plot and you want to put your climax at a certain point and your midpoint and your the 11th hour dark night of the soul point. And I'll kind of map it out actually on the physical manuscript, looking at number of words and where the chapters are and say, like, okay, when I go into my revision, I know that I am intentionally trying to get, like, I'm cutting down 300 words from here so that I get to this part of the story a little faster, which gives me a little bit more time to expand on, like, some villain motivation here that's missing. Because otherwise I'll lose my mind.
It helps too, the style that you're writing in. If I were doing, for instance, my dad is writing a Civil War historical novel right now, a historical fiction novel right now. And if I were to be writing that, I would take a much more character-driven Panzer way of doing that. And part of that is because, we all kind of have a innate knowledge in our head from years of schooling of, maybe not the Civil War, because that was a long time ago, but, different wars throughout time, we kind of know generally the events that happened. And so by already having that kind of ingrained in your head, it gives me the freedom to just be like, okay, characters, go, do what you want to do. Let's see what happens. And going through and knowing that even if I don't have anything to do with, the battles of Gettysburg, I know that that's going to happen somewhere near the end of this book. I know that that's eventually where these characters are going to get. And so I'm fine with letting them just go free. But in something that I'm fully creating the whole new world, in something like a fantasy or a sci-fi novel, I go full Tolkien with it. I write those side stories about the little minor characters and this location, that this city, now you get a whole little mini novella about the history of that city. And I go all in with that because I need to have all of those events and all of that kind of history in my mind to then see where these characters are going to go.
Well, we've got a couple more minutes here if anybody has any final questions that they want to ask our workshop leaders. Catherine.
Yeah.
So my question, I have trouble coming up with plots quickly because I constantly find problems with them. I'm like, well, this can't happen because this isn't realistic, or this won't puzzle together with this in the right way. Do you have any tips for getting past that?
I have literally killed people, like, in my novels with, like, series of
I like
poisons.
that we addended that in your novels.
I know, I just
Glad
think
we put that little addendum on the end of that sentence here.
I have murdered people over bad plots. No. I've just gone with the ridiculous thing. Like, I have a whole series of weeks in which I murdered a gladiator in an arena with a knife that is poison to one person and not poison to the other person, with no idea how that was going to work, or what the underlying world explanation would be, or how, like, did anyone care except for me? And I was just like, this is my only thought. If I am going to write forward at all, I'm just going to go with it. And then I texted my friend who is a chemist, and I was like, please help me. And she told me that I should go to therapy, and also
you should put peanut butter on the blade.
Right, like something like that. There was, if I did a couple of weird things, like, I'm writing in a fantasy world, I could fudge it this way and it would be close enough to real chemistry that it would work. And I don't know, this is sort of if you can let go of your editor brain, for me, while you're writing, you can always fix what's on the page. You can't fix what you haven't written. And this is sort of the mantra that I have for myself. This is kind of why I write the way I do, is because I can absolutely get caught in the cycle of overthinking and never writing anything down.
So Google Keep is my friend. Google Keep is a little note taking app, but it works just as well on the computer as it does on a smartphone. Because one problem I'll run into is the same thing you do, Catherine, of writing these scenes together, or writing, even plotting them out, that don't make any sense together, or they're just really unrealistic, or have all these issues with them. But I will get so kind of attached to some of those scenes. I really like that character A killed that guy. It doesn't make sense, but I really like that it happened. What I'll do is I will cut it out of that story, and I'll put it down in my Google Keep. And then I can sit there, and then as I'm coming up with, my next story, I can just scroll through all these notes that I've got. And I was like, oh yeah, I've got that really cool murder scene I thought about. Throw that in there. That works for this movie a lot better than it did for the first one. And so I've just got to list this series of scenes and plot points and random characters and little bits and pieces that don't fully fit into the things that I've written so far, that I just save and keep until later, because for whatever reason I've become attached to these characters or to these particular scenes.
The other thing I do is I take my partner on long walks, which means that I've attached him to my arm. And then I say, so I have this plot problem.
Yep.
And I just talk at him, and he's just stuck there, right? Like, we're on a walk. He doesn't have his phone. I have to pretend that he's listening to me. And and just saying it out loud to another person really helps. And, bless him. He knows that this is something that I do and actually volunteers. But having someone who's willing to just sit there and rubber ducky it, this is what they call it in computer engineering. My partner is a mathematician. You literally stick a rubber ducky on your, next to your computer, and when you hit a thorny problem, you speak out loud to your rubber ducky. In this case, my partner, but it's a rubber ducky, and the rubber ducky helps. Always.
So when Carson and I were writing a lot of stuff together, we wrote a lot of scripts together. One thing that we would do when he and I would get really stuck in whatever scene or plot issue, we would go and we'd play mini golf. And it just kind of took the pressure off, because now you're not stuck in a room trying to write, trying to force yourself on the computer. It's got all this pressure that you need to write. Now we're just sitting there playing mini golf. You go, you know what? What if we did that? It doesn't work. That's a stupid idea. You know what? What if it is this instead? And it was just now it became fun again. And it just became this, we're focused on the game and just kind of spitballing these things. And by the time we were done playing mini golf, whatever, hour or so later, we would have our story back. And we'd have control of it again, because it was one that we got so stuck on the pressure of we have to write and it has to be right now. We're sitting in front of our computers, that we would get stuck and get trapped in that.
I just like mini golf. That was fun.
That's such a good
That's
idea.
It's also true.
I love
It's also
that.
true. Well, it's the same kind of method of you taking a walk with your partner and, getting out of that sitting at your computer mentality and just sit there and throw things at that person. What bounces back?
Yeah. I mean, now I think I need to take him with mini golf. I feel like I've been failing him, really.
Well, let's segue off of that course. Ha!
See what you did there.
And let's bring it up for any short final questions that anyone has that they haven't had a chance to ask yet. If there's anything, I'll do the auctioneers.
See, welcome, Kim.
This is very helpful.
Sorry, I'm late.
It's very helpful.
I'm glad it was helpful.
Learned something.
I had a couple of the same comments, actually. We lost two of the guys here. Dan and Spencer had to leave when we started doing our writing prompts, but both of them actually messaged me and said that they had learned some stuff, which is good. Glad to hear that our random methods actually help people.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Deanna. You guys are fantastic. This was a blast. So for the future, going forwards into more workshops, this is something that RTW wants to do on a continuing basis, hopefully monthly. So keep your eyes open. We also have Monday morning write-ins where you can just show up. It's very informal, very fun. A lot of the same faces who are here will be there. And that's a great way to just interact with the community. And then we're looking at some larger projects in the coming year and a half, 2 years, that I think a lot of people who want to become long-term members will be very excited about. Hint, one of them is a literary journal that pulls in work from our community specifically and publishes it and promotes it. So let's see, any final words? Anyone who wants to actually lead one of these workshops? We're specifically a community-oriented community. So we want to actually have members of our broader community involved in the leadership. I know. Brendan is trying so hard right
keep
now.
a tally of how
He's
many
trying
times
so
you can
hard.
say community in one breath. Just gonna keep a little tally
At
mark
least
here.
6. All right. But yeah, if anybody has an idea for something that they want to lead, bring it to us. Bring it to me. Let me know. We'll find someone to pair you with, and we'll see if you guys can work out a cool little workshop together. Otherwise, just hang out in the community, have fun, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for coming out, guys.
Thank you.